can do, though, is we can provide some very targeted and specific instruction for students depending on where they are and where their difficulties might be. And today, that's what Jody and I are going to talk about. We're going to give you information about how reading is made up of many skills. Sorry, it's hard to breathe. How to determine which skills are difficult for students and when we need to provide an intervention and what an appropriate intervention will be. We're also going to give you resources that we have collected. We're going to give you links to resources that are online and things that you can actually go back and use with students. So we'll share a folder with you at the end of the day or at the end of our session today with a presentation in it, with a recording, and then the links to resources as well. And some of the resources are linked within our presentation today. So the first thing we want to start with is the simple view of reading. So that's really nice to think about, that reading can be broken down into something that's simple because reading is complicated. But if we look at this equation, we've got word recognition times language comprehension is going to equal reading comprehension, which is our goal of reading, to be able to read and get that information and then to be able to use it. I want you to notice that word recognition and language comprehension, that it's not a sum, it's a product. So we have to have both pieces in order to get something in that final box. So let's look at how that works out for students. When a student has word recognition, a 1, for like student A here in the box, and language comprehension, a 1, 1 times 1 equals 1. So if we have word recognition and language comprehension, then we end with reading comprehension, our goal. For student B, we're looking at a student who is having difficulty in word recognition. So there's a 0 there. They don't have mastery on that yet, but they're really strong in language comprehension. Speaking and listening are big strengths for this student. But because we don't have a 1 in each spot, we still have a 0 for reading comprehension. Student C is the opposite. This is our student who is really good at reading the words and calling the words on a page, but their understanding isn't there. They don't have those language skills. And reading comprehension is a 0. For student D, this is a student that has difficulty in both areas. These are our neediest students. And of course, we end up with a 0 in reading comprehension because we don't have mastery of either one. At the bottom, student E, this is our student who does pretty good with reading words. They have some troubles, but they sound okay, and their language comprehension skills are great. These are the kids that sometimes we can't figure out why they're not doing better in reading and why comprehension is difficult for them. It's because they only have about half of the word recognition piece, and when you multiply that 0.5 times the 1 in language comprehension, you still get a 0.5. So you don't have everything you need to have mastery of those skills yet. Now, here's where things are going to get a little more complicated. We just talked about word recognition, and that's indicated in the blue at the bottom of this graphic, and language comprehension, the red piece at the top. You can see that each one of those is broken down into many skills. In order for a student to be a skilled reader and for us to reach that goal of reading comprehension, students need all of those pieces or all of those strands that are woven into the reading rope. We're going to start off talking about word recognition first, and then we're going to talk more about language comprehension because we do need both in order for our student to be successful as a reader. When we talk about word recognition, you may have noticed there were 3 pieces to that strand of the reading rope. There's phonological awareness, which deals with syllables, phonemes, our sounds and words. There's decoding, which is using that alphabetic principle. It's knowing that this letter or group of letters represents this sound and using that knowledge to read words. It's also the sound spelling correspondence, so then using sounds to write our words. So reading them, with them coming in and us giving the sound, writing them with us giving the sound and writing the word down. And then there's sight recognition, These are words that we know automatically that don't require effort for us to figure out. They're those automatic words that our kids know. So our first piece, phonological awareness, is a really big skill. It includes identifying and manipulating units of oral language. We're talking about parts of words such as syllables, single sounds or phonemes, onsets and rhymes. That's the first part of the word before the vowel. The rhyme is the vowel and the rest of the word. So the rhyme spelled differently from rhyming words, but talking about the same piece. When we're looking at our levels of phonological awareness, we start down here with early, and so we have students working on rhyming, counting words and sentences, alliteration, those same sounds. We know that some students who are learning language rhyming can be really difficult for them. I'm going to talk about a way that I support students with rhyming in a few minutes, but there are things that we can do through phonological awareness to support that for our students. You can see as we move on, we talk about syllables, the chunks of words, the onsets and rhymes again, that beginning sound. For example, the in fish, and then ish being the rhyme. And then we move into phonemic awareness where we really start to use those small pieces of sound that are in words. We move them around, we delete them, and we substitute them. And all of these things are going to build a firm foundation for our students so that they can become automatic in their decoding and they can recognize many words in their sight word vocabulary. So, phonological difficulties. What does this look like in a student? How do you know if this is an area where a student is having difficulty? How do you know that this is what needs to be supported so that that student can become more successful? When we see students who are not able to identify a rhyme, and that's separate from language, we know that some students, rhyme is not a thing for them when they come in with their original language. So that may be a concept that we teach for our students, but separate from that, if they've had that instruction and they're still struggling. Difficulty in counting syllables in a word. So, elephant. If they're not able to count those syllables in a word or it's confusing for them. If students are having trouble identifying the sounds in the words, do they know that at is cat? Can they break down the word into those three sounds? Or identifying words that have the same sound. Do the words dog and dig have the same beginning? We also can see difficulty blending sounds into words. So being able to take the sounds at and understand that when we blend those together or say them fast, it's the word pat. Now, there are some screening tools that you might want to use to get a little more information if you think a student has a phonological difficulties. And these are free. You can grab them on the internet. I'm going to show you those links right now. The first is the PAST test. Thanks. So this is the Phonological Awareness Screening Test. And there's a link to it. You can download it for free. And as you go through, you are going to give the student tasks to test their phonological awareness to find out which levels the students may need to work on or where a difficulty might lie. There are 4 different forms of the test, so you can give this test and kind of progress monitor and see how students might be doing with that. Thanks. Sorry, I'm trying to do it. There's also an assessment on the Haggerty site. Now, our teachers in kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade have the Haggerty curriculum, and that's being used every day in classrooms to help build phonological awareness in our students because that is such an important skill for all students. You might be able to make arrangements with a teacher in your building to share a book, to use that as a resource to help students and support them as they grow in their phonological awareness. There is a, would you share that? Thank you. So we're going to show you, Jody's going to help me out with that. So you might be able to arrange to borrow a book from a teacher or share a book. There may be one in your building that's not being used by a teacher right now, so you may want to ask about that. The primary level 1 for 1st and 2nd grade is yellow. The kindergarten level 1 is blue. There is a pre-K one that is purple. Those were not purchased for schools last year, but someone in your school building may have bought that one separately. There are sample lessons on the website that you can access. You do have to put in your email address to access the downloads. They're not super bothering about sending you a lot of emails and things. You will get some, but it's not one of those everyday deals. Let's look at the kindergarten one. And you may notice also on the page, there are baseline assessments in Spanish as well as English on here. So this is the screen you'll see, and you do have to do this every single time you download something from them. So it's kind of a bother, but again, it's not a ton of email. So here's what you'll see. This is the kindergarten baseline assessment. There is one at the primary level, and there is also one at the pre-K level. And again, there are baseline assessments in Spanish. You can go through these. You can choose to do portions to see if there's a particular area where a student might need to work on that to increase their abilities with that skill. If you decide to give the whole thing, I would definitely give it over a couple of days, not all at one shot, because it is a little lengthy. And there are really good directions about how to do those things. And there are examples and practice items for you to walk through with your students. So we're going to take you to the summary page and show you where you can kind of analyze your data from this assessment. So you can see here that the skills fall into three categories: that beginning, developing, or proficient. So if you have a student who has some categories in developing, that's definitely an area you want to work on. I would work on those first and then move into those beginning ones. If a student is proficient, you might hit it every now and again just to stay steady with it, but you're not going to need to spend as much time working on those skills. All right, so once you know where your area of difficulty is in phonological awareness, then you can begin to support the student and provide an intervention for that. When we're doing phonological awareness activities with our students, we want it to be quick. It does need to be a daily practice. Now, for some students who aren't in the building every day, that may not be how things work out this year. But providing it consistently for the students is what's going to help them make that progress, because it does begin to become automatic, and we're training them to hear those sounds. As you work through phonological awareness, you want to start with big chunks first. So we start working with whole words. For example, in a blending activity with a whole word, I would work on a compound word. So I might say cup, cake. Now we're going to put those together, cupcake. So we're going to start off with those big chunks. Then we're going to move down into smaller chunks, syllables in a word. And then finally, to the sounds or phonemes, those individual speech sounds. So start big and then get smaller as your student gains in those skills. Some activities that you can do for phonological awareness are listed here. Phonological awareness is mostly about sounds. You may need to use some pictures here, but a lot of it's going to be that oral language. So rhyming books, poems, singing songs, playing with words, little word games with students. You know, can you think of a phrase to go with four foxes, and we want to start with a word that starts with F, or the sound. Counting words in sentences, you can count those off the way you would syllables, or you can tap syllables. Playing with words that rhyme. There is a progression for rhyming. So we want to start off with thinking about words that rhyme or repeating rhymes. So lick, stick. We just flip those words and listen to them, and we listen for the sound that sounds alike. You can also work on giving 3 words and asking which 2 rhyme. Does a word rhyme with another word? And you're giving the words to the student, and then they're thinking about, is that a rhyming pair or not a rhyming pair? The final stage of rhyme is when you ask a child to produce the rhyme for you. What's a word that rhymes with sit? That's a much harder skill than picking out which 2 words are rhyming words. So you do want to work in that progression. Now, when we are talking about phonemic awareness, which is a part of phonological awareness, phonemic awareness is when we're talking about understanding each separate sound and linking that sound to a letter. This picture shows a sound wall. This is something that teachers are beginning to use rather than a word wall. So instead of teaching words and putting them up on the wall, where sometimes they become decoration and they're just a part of what's in your classroom and they're not that useful to students, the sound wall shows how each sound is formed, what your lips are going to look like. It's going to give you clues about where the tongue should be, the placement of the mouth, and you can also see there are cards with a picture of something that has the sound, and then there are ways to spell that sound or how that sound looks when it's written out in letters. The website at the bottom, toolsforreading.com, shows you the sound wall. There are videos about the sound wall and how it can be used and how it was developed. That's the company that created the pictures that you see used in the sound wall here. This is actually a picture from their website. Now, over on the side, on the Make Your Own tab, we have materials that were made by the TTAC folks at JMU, and we have permission to share those out. You can create your own sound wall. So a little work involved, some printing, some cutting, some laminating, but it is available to you free of charge. Whereas if you go and you bought the kit, it can get expensive. Jody, would you show the Make Your Own file? Yes. And this is going to be in your resource folder that we'll be sharing out with all of you. Here it comes. Yep, there we go. All right, so you can see we have picture cards of students making each sound. It shows what their mouth looks like. This is really important for sounds that sound similar. By thinking about mouth position, this can help students differentiate. I'm thinking of short A and short E right now, that ah and eh, those can be tricky. But thinking about mouth placement and showing that to students can be really helpful. Now, you may have to video yourself showing it to students and showing your mouth placement in our school year today because of our coverings, our masks. That makes it a little more difficult. Or you might be able to use a mask with a clear panel so that students can see your lips. Ideally, students would have a hand mirror and they would be able to see their own lips when they're making the sounds. Again, that's not possible right now, but in the future perhaps. We've got the vowel cards as well down here at the bottom. For students, English vowels can be really tricky. There are a lot more vowel sounds in English than there are in other languages. So this is something that we really want to focus on, making sure that students learn those new sounds, understand how to form those new sounds, and can listen for those new sounds so that then they can use that sound knowledge to read words. You've got copies of the consonant wall and the vowel valley. It's shaped like a V when you set that up. That's why it's called the valley. These are small ones that you can print out and use with students, or you can use this as a guide to making your own sound wall. Typically what happens is as a sound is introduced, it goes onto the wall. You don't put it all up at once. That would be a little overwhelming and not so helpful to your students. You have students working on different sounds. You might need something to show fifth graders are working on this sound with a 5 next to it, or the green group is working on this sound and just have a green sticky note or piece of paper they're showing. You've got copies of the cards that you can print and put up for your sound wall. So all of that is there. It's a little work up front to get it ready, but super useful for students. So Jody made a really good point. If you are teaching students virtually, you can also take those cards and show them on your screen for your students that are not there with you in person to see a sound wall.
I have a question.
Okay, we have a question.
I'm going to go back to that slide. Okay, my environmental last for a second. Okay, first of all, the first project was, this is great, thank you. Okay, and then sometimes the sounds are difficult for our ELs to use because they don't exist in the first language or instead of different. And the next one is, I've been challenged by trying to decide whether to focus on correcting phonetics, phonetic errors that are language related, or to focus on computer comprehension, development, what it lies to have good word recognition. Anyone has experience with this? Or what do you think is the best?
All right. Jody and I had to have a little sidebar about that. We are in agreement. You do want to try to fix those sounds that are difficult or that are different in another language. I've had that experience as well. Some of my students who are English learners, they've said to me, this doesn't exist, or that letter makes this sound, and then I understand why the errors are happening the way they are, and we've worked through that and developed some clues for kids. We've made little sticky note reminders to help them, and I'll point to it as appropriate to help those students out. We do want to correct those as much as possible, because when those are corrected, that is going to support fluency and comprehension later on. So some are going to be difficult to correct because of language, but we want to do as much as we can to ease the reading process for the students. I hope that's helpful. I'm sorry that's not a hard answer on that one. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about phonemic awareness. So we want to focus on sounds when we're doing that. That's why we showed the sound wall, and it is so important for students to be able to produce those sounds. We want to use our bodies too when we're doing this, so we want to make it multisensory. One of the things students can do to help build phonemic awareness is identify the first, ending, or medial vowel sound in a word, and identify other words that have that same sound. I have linked a video here that shows me doing part of a phonemic awareness lesson. You will see me using these strategies. So the first one on the video is rhyme time, where I flip the words. And that's just students listening for words that have a rhyme. Then we do stamp and slide. Stamp and slide is really great for identifying that beginning sound in a word. So we'll practice that a little bit here. So I'll say the word pat. What's our word? And then I would stamp with my hand. So this is my first sound. And then I'm going to slide at for the rest of that word. So my onset or first sound, and then my rhyme, at, for the rest of that word. Now this is a strategy we encourage students to use also when they're spelling words and writing words, to listen for that beginning sound as a way to isolate it and know how to start. One of the other things you'll see on the video is punch it out, which is good for ending sounds. So if we do pat again, here's what it would look like for punch it out when we listen for that last sound. Pat. And we really exaggerate that ending sound. We really want students to draw their attention to that. There are some other strategies that are useful. The one that's not on our video is called roller coaster. This is where we're really listening for that medial sound, that medial vowel. So if our word is pat again, we're going to go going up the hill, at the top, and then going down the hill. So, and you can ask students to repeat the sound that they're listening for at the end. So at the end, we might say, what's our top of the hill sound? We also want to work on blending sounds into words. So I might say the words and for the students to blend those together and say the word map. So a motion you might do for that would be and then we're going to baseball it, map, and swing at that word. Another way you can work on this is breaking your words into sounds. So if we're breaking a word into sounds, I'm going to give students the word and I'm going to say, hold this word. The word is eyes. And then I'm going to say, what's our word? Because I want them to repeat it. I want to make sure that they heard what I want them to hear and that my South Georgia accent didn't mangle that word for them. So, eyes. And I'm going to break it apart. I, and then I'm going to throw it away and start with a new word. You can also do this with our compound words. So if we have cupcake, cup, cake, and throw that away. And remember, our whole word parts are going to be first, and then we're going to move into the smaller parts, and we're going to break apart that word. So anything you can do with hand motions. Now, these are the ones that I learned from other teachers. It doesn't mean that they are the only way you can use motions with these words. If there's something that works better for your students, do that instead. That's absolutely fine. You can also do the smash it up, where you have the two parts. They may be parts of words, phonemes, they may be syllables, they may be words that we combine for a compound word, and then we smash them together. The kids love this one, that's their favorite every single time. The last one I want to talk about is adding, substituting, and deleting the sounds. So this is just you saying the word to them and then mentally thinking about how that's going to work. Yes, question?
Yes. They want to know, are all of this in the video or can we teach Jody to do the motion?
So the only one that's not in the video is roller coaster. The video has rhyme time, which is flipping the rhyme. It has stamp and slide. It has punch it out, and it has smash it up. The only one that's not in there is the middle, and that's because I am doing HLA pre-K, and we're not ready for medial sounds yet. But if you need a demonstration, let me know. So
you can also go to the Heggerty website. If you go to their Heggerty website, they have videos on there, and so sometimes they do some different techniques with some of these. They're very similar.
Yeah.
But you just have to find what works for you. So, and they are getting Heggerty books were given to all
K1 and 2.
K1 and 2 teachers. So the idea is that those kids are getting that instruction daily, and that's really important. And I know Stephanie said that daily, but as a reading specialist and then as EL teachers, those are the students who usually need this like a double dose of it. So it would be helpful if, even though they've already done this in the classroom, this may be the area they really need to work on again.
Yeah, that's a really good point. As a reading specialist, I would do at least portions of the Heggerty lesson every day, even though I knew my students were already getting it from their classroom teacher. Because if students are coming to me, they need extra support. They need that extra dose. All right, so I want to talk a little bit more about blending sounds into words. There are some things that you can use with this that might be helpful. We can take a look at the Elkonian boxes.
They would like to know if you will be able to type in the word type that you mentioned.
Yes, I will. I'll copy and paste it in. I'm going to let her share this first, then I'll type it in. Yes.
All right, Jody is going to answer that question in just a sec when we're done with this portion. So when we're blending words, one of the things that we often will do for students is to show them these 3 boxes. This is kind of where we start. You can do 2, you can do 3, it can get longer, however many sounds you are working on, but each box represents one sound, not one letter. So it's important to remember that. So we would start off with 3 chips or 3 blocks lined up on this arrow. I start on the arrow, you can start above the boxes. That part is really your preference. Students then move a letter, move a chip or a block, whatever it is you're using, up into the box. So if we were going to do the word pat, we would do move the first chip, move the second chip, move the last chip. When we've got all of our chips moved, we're going to say the sounds fast to read the word, and we're going to drag our finger along that arrow. That helps us with directionality and remembering to start on the left, and that's the order of our sounds. That's the way we should read our sounds. So fast, we would go pat. All right. Now let's take a look at the blending mat. So this is a bigger set of boxes. If you have more sounds or longer words, you might use the blending mat instead. It's the same idea. You're going to use chips or boxes or cubes. I've seen teachers use little matchbox cars to really engage some students to do that. So you'll start off the same. You say the word and then have the student say the word. I always have them repeat the word when we're working on sounds. It's just helpful for the students to do that. And it helps you check and make sure that they have heard what you intended for them to hear. So up at the top above the boxes, I would start with chips, cubes, whatever it might be. And then I'm going to say my word and I'm going to bring it down. So if I say the word tip, I'm going to pull down t, I, p. 3 cubes or chips, whatever it might be. 1 cube for each sound, and then I'm going to say it fast. Tip. Now, there's a second row of boxes here so that you can map the letters and the sounds together. So underneath the first box, the t, in that bottom box, you'll write the letter, the T. I, you'll write the I underneath. P, you'll write the P underneath. And that's a way to really make that connection between the sounds and the letters for students. As you start working on longer words, keep in mind that one sound goes in one box. So if you have two letters making one sound, you're going to have two letters in a box. So, Jody, if we can go to the next slide, I'll show what that looks like.
I have a question. How do you envision using this map digitally?
So I'm going to show you in just a minute a place where you can go that does have some digital resources where you can actually use the chips and the boxes. There are some available and they're free. Already made, yay. So when we're blending sounds into words, when you're adding the letters to map the patterns, and you wouldn't want to do this first. You would want to let students work with just the sounds first. Then later on, when you bring in the letter portion and you're writing, notice this first set. We've got ship. So SH, two letters, one sound, that goes in one box. If you're working on the AI pattern, like in the word train, AI goes in just one box because it's just one sound. We really want to cement that connection with students in how the sound is represented and what letters are representing that sound. Then our last example, that silent E, that can go underneath. It does not get a separate box because the E is not adding a sound to that word. So here at the bottom, as promised, our resources. So the first one is the University of Florida Literacy Institute. They've got some online resources for teachers. These are free. All you have to do is go there. So if it weren't just spinning and we could click on the website, you would be able to see that there are resources there with digital boxes and digital chips that you can move with your students. There are also some really great digital resources for pay that are out there that you can use. I don't really recommend doing that because that's a lot of money for us to put out of our pocket. But if you have the opportunity for any of that, that might be a consideration. 95% Group is a company that makes chip kits that you can see. You don't really need a chip kit physically because you can use any resource that you already have. Pieces of colored paper, Unifix cubes, cut out little bingo markers and use those. But that is a resource for the online ones. If you are interested in seeing that, they have some demonstration videos too that might be helpful. We do want students to be able to move the chip, and it may not be something that you can do with these resources, but you can have students do the motions. You can have them doing that and moving those chips. They can also move something at home because, again, you can use anything to do this. It could be a piece of paper. It could be a penny. It could be a Lego or a block, whatever they might have at home that they could use to move those.
If you have the settings set up so that the students can annotate, they should be able to move it.
Thank you. I did not think about that.
They should be able to.
So, annotate. Thank you. Right, so there are some possibilities with the annotation in Jamboard. I'm not sure how it works in slides.
You would have to share a copy of the slides,
Okay.
one copy with all the students,
Thank you.
and then you have to have editing access to it.
Okay, so editing access and a copy of Google Slides is also a way that you could share that with students. See, I'm learning stuff today. Thank you. No? Oh, okay.
I don't know why it was.
If you have smartboard access,
Yeah.
make a board and smartboard. Yeah.
Smartboard as well. That's
I do
another
with
good
my,
suggestion.
I've been doing it interactively, virtually with my fifth graders, with their word study lesson, especially my lower level ones, which actually have a lot of EL kids in there. And what we do is I do it on Jamboard and I use the sticky notes and then I just share editing access with them and then I just change the access when we're done. But they can easily manipulate that and they can all be on the same board at the same time and they can see each other like interact. So it does create some interaction. It's pretty easy to use. And the kids don't have a hard time using it either.
Dare we try again?
It just keeps
Okay. Okay. So you do want to go back and click on those links later on for the University of Florida. They have got the boxes like we demonstrated there. And then the other website, FRCC, Florida Reading Resource Center, They have a research database, and you can put in any area of literacy in their search engine, and it will return to you those activities. You can print those out. They're free to use, and there are really just tons of great resources there. There are, and you know, if you need pictures for things, those are already there for you, and it does a really nice job of explaining how you can use those with students.
And they're fun. Some of them, there are games and things like that with them that reinforce the skills. So.
Yeah, they're activities, so they are fun for the kids to do. It's not a worksheet sort of situation. All right, which brings us to decoding. That's our final piece of the strand in our our second piece of the strand in our word recognition part of the reading rope. So decoding is just that automatic ability to know what the letters and the sound, let me start again. It's the automatic ability to understand which sounds are represented by the letters that we see on a page. It's how to pronounce those words so that you're actually doing the physical reading of the words. In order for this to happen, students have got to be automatic with their letter-sound relationships. And this is where the sound walls, again, can be useful for your students. Pushing those sounds into the boxes supports this as well. So, decoding difficulties. This is pretty easy to spot. Kids are going to be guessing words. They're going to use things like pictures, beginning sounds, or context, which is not real reading, and I tell them that very quickly. We don't guess. It's confusing visually similar words like the words lick and like. Students who skip lots of words or their voice gets really quiet and they start to mumble, it's because they don't know what the word is. So they're just trying to skate by and just make something that kind of sounds like that word. Dropping the endings of words and then having difficulty spelling words can also indicate a decoding difficulty. So you can do some screening or progress monitoring using PALS Quick Checks, the pseudo word decoding, which is where they apply the letter sounds to read words that don't make any sense, but it's can you use the sounds to figure out what the word would be instead of relying on, is this a word I know? Is this a word that's in my vocabulary? Truly, I would only use that for progress monitoring. Observing reading behaviors will give you a lot more information about whether or not decoding is a difficulty for your student. For supporting students that are having trouble with decoding, we can use the sound walls to reinforce the sounds of English. You can practice letter-sound relationships until they're automatic. I've made a folder in our resource folder for you that has information about letter-sound automaticity tasks. So, Jody, if you'll go to that, I'll talk about those 3 tasks. So the first automaticity task that you would want to do with students, and this is in the document that says letter-sound automaticity at the bottom. It's a really big, long document, but I've written out the instructions for these things, so I'm going to share that with you. I have flashcards that I use. In the file, you're going to see a Google Slides presentation. It has the letters on the cards. You can make a copy of it, and you can mix the order up with the cards. You can flash those for students on your smartboard, on a device, virtually. But the first task is to show the letter, and instead of having the student tell you the letter name, you want them to tell you the letter sound. Now, if there are some letters that your students are still struggling with the name and the sound, you could have them say F, and then you go to the next sound, C, and you can practice that way. But the sound is super important. You don't want to leave that part off. If they know letter names, you can just do letter sounds. Will you click on the first one, automaticity and words? Yep, thank you. Jody's going to show you a document that's in there. I'm going to use that as I talk about what I ask the students to do. At the top, you're going to see 26 lines because there are 26 letters of the alphabet. Something that students struggle with that we don't always realize is knowing what a letter looks like and being able to produce that letter on their page. So here, students write one letter in each blank. Intentionally, this is split at M at the end of the first line, N at the beginning of the second line, because students struggle. They think element of P is just one letter. This helps them differentiate that M, and N, are 2 different letters with 2 different sounds. I run into that a lot with the students that I see, so we've been really intentional about making sure to differentiate those 2. or students who have difficulty writing the entire alphabet. If that's just too big of a task right now, you have some options. You can give them just the first line of the alphabet, or you can give them a partially completed alphabet. There's a file in the folder that has 6 or 8 different partially completed alphabets that you are welcome to use with your students.
It's the one right there.
Yes, that one. The one that says copy of partial alphabet, those are just really big ones that you might print off and have students actually go around and write if they are moving around writing the room. Okay. So then let's talk about the boxes in the middle. These are what I call sound boxes. Here is where I give the sound and the student writes the letter that represents the sound. And they write as many representations for that sound as they know. So if I make the sound, they need to write a C and a K in that box. And if I have taught them CK after a short vowel, my expectation is they will also write CK in the box. And I would say, show me 3 ways to spell the sound. And I talk about it as spelling the sound. How are you going to show me that sound with letters or one letter? At the bottom, there are blanks there where students can practice writing words with patterns, and there are also some blanks for sentences. It's your choice about how you want to incorporate all of that. But those 3 automaticity tasks, telling the sounds, writing the alphabet, and the sound boxes can really help build students' automatic recall of letters and sounds so that they can then use that to decode words more easily. All right, so our next bullet point talks about how students map and write words that use the pattern. So we did that with our boxes. We isolated the sounds, and then we wrote the sound in each box. So that's mapping your word. One thing that I like to do with students that I don't think I mentioned is to tap the word. When I say the word and the student says the word back, then we tap the sounds, and this is really great for helping them isolate. So if my word is stop, they say stop, and then we tap. If I run out of fingers, I start again. I go back to my index finger, and I tap those sounds so that we can hear and listen for the sounds. That also informs me as the teacher, are they hearing all the sounds? For example, PL can be really tricky. So if my word is plot, and my student goes, ought, then I know they're not getting that L, the second part of that blend, and I can immediately talk about that with the student. DR. I teach that explicitly, that JR is not a blend. Because JR and DR sound alike, there are no JRs. We write JR and we do a big red X through it. I'm super intentional about that because it is so confusing. And while we're talking about it, TR, kids want to write CHR. In English, CHR is cur. It's not chur. So we also write CHR and we put a big red X through that. And I go through the words that use CHR as a pattern, but the sound is cur, like Christmas. Chris, it's great when you have a Chris or a Christopher in your group because you can use them immediately as your example. When we talk about that is just one of the things that you're not going to have with your English sounds. Before moving into a new pattern, you really want to make sure the students have mastered that pattern. I found that a lot of word study that we provide our students moves too fast for students who are learning English and for students who have reading difficulties. So when they come to me, I focus on one and let them get the mastery of that particular sound. Then we'll move into a new sound. And we always compare 2 that are known. So when I am mixing sounds together, I would make sure that the student knows both of those sounds really well. The last bullet point about using decodable text, as students are developing their ability to match letters and sounds automatically, decodable text is very appropriate for them. It's not the most exciting thing in the world to read. For us as adults, we're like, oh, the fat cat sat on the mat. But if the student knows and they can read the fat cat sat on the mat, they are not going to complain about that because they are going to know that what you give them to read, they can be successful with. I use a lot of decodable text, and once kids figure out that, hey, I can read what Mrs. Knicely's given me, they are fine with it. I don't get the complaints that you might imagine. Here's an example of some decodable text at the bottom. Kate is a frog in a lake. So you can see that I've highlighted words that have the A consonant E pattern. Our strategy when we're using decodable text, the first time through the text, just highlight your target pattern. Second time through the text, read the words that use the target pattern. Third time through the text, read the entire text. So then you've had 3 passes through that pattern, which is really going to help the student remember and master those patterns. Now, decodable text can be tricky for people to get their hands on. There are free decodable texts online. I have a list that I've kind of been going through. Sometimes it can be really hard to find, but I'm going to try to firm up that list and put it into our folder for you guys. If you have access to reading A to Z, there is decodable text there that you can use as well. Again, it's not perfect. I have used it and then supplemented from some other places where I've been able to grab some decodable text. The reading series does have a teacher workbook that has decodable text in it. That's another source that you might use. But you don't even have to have a long book. If you can just find a passage or a paragraph where that text is decodable and focuses on the pattern that you're using with your students, then you've got something for them. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about older students with decodable text. It has been my experience, and I work with kindergartners through 5th graders in a typical school year. My 5th grade boys, who are too cool for school, will read decodable text and not complain about it. It doesn't matter if it's babyish. It doesn't matter what it looks like to them. If they can read it, and once they know that they can read that and be successful with it, I don't get that pushback from them. A lot of times we anticipate that with our older students, but if you can just kind of gently ease them into that, you can get some buy-in.
So Joanna, any topic is in the book, you might want to use the whiteboard to demonstrate how students enjoy it. They also may report themselves through shifts and cultural skills on their assignments. We have many students who can explore whiteboard at high, but they will not see each other for.
Yeah, you can also, if you're using Seesaw, you can download if you're like reading A to Z. I think most people now have an access to that. You can download them as a PDF, and then you can actually put them in Seesaw too, where they can manipulate. So you can do it on the screen there too. So
yeah, so those are great suggestions to use the Reading A to Z downloadable PDFs in Seesaw. And Yolanda had some excellent suggestions there too. Thank you for adding that. Okay, so now we're going to talk about sight recognition. Our phonological awareness piece, our decoding piece, those are going to work together to support sight recognition. Our goal here is automatic word recognition. We want to be instant and effortless. These are the words that you know as soon as you see them. When we talk about this, we're thinking about orthographic mapping. That's a process of matching the spoken word that we hear to a unique string of letters that we see on the page. Adults have sight word vocabularies of 30,000 to 70,000 words, which supports the theory that this is not a visual memory trick. This is actually the sound letter association that's in our brains. So this is a really quick and simplified explanation of how we actually read words. So we have visual input from our page through our eyes. We see the letters that are on the page. Then that goes back to the area of the brain that recognizes the letters, that makes sense of those squiggles and lines. They have meaning. Then that activates the portion of our brain where we recognize the letters and we make a connection from a letter to a sound. And when we make that connection from letters to sounds, then we can read that word. It activates in the portion of the brain where we get our pronunciation for a word so that we can say that word. And the last activation is our context or meaning to understand that word. For an automatic reading of a word, this takes about 1/20 of a second. It's really automatic and it is effortless. Think about all the words that you know that you don't have to think about. That's what we want to build for our students. So Here's how we can do that. We can learn the patterns and decode those words, but then we also have all of these irregular, high-frequency words. They don't match the patterns. There's something different about them. The way we do that is through a strategy called heart words. I'm going to show you a video from the website Really Great Reading. It's linked here. And this gives a great explanation of heart words. This is something that I have used and a lot of classroom teachers are using as well.
How long did it take you to read it? You probably read it immediately, effortlessly. Researchers estimate that when a word is familiar to you, you read it in less than 1/20th of a second. Words that we read effortlessly are called sight words. Sight words can be high-frequency words like these. Sight words can also be low-frequency words like these. If you read these words effortlessly, they are sight words for you. The collection of words you can read without conscious effort is called your sight word memory. Literate adults have a sight word memory of between 30,000 and 70,000 words.
Everyone's sight word memory is a little different. A first grader's sight word memory often includes like this. A doctor's sight word memory often includes words like this.
Evidence is very clear that the way to get a word anchored into our sight word memory is through decoding. Once we decode a word successfully several times, it sticks in our brain, where we can recognize and retrieve it effortlessly. High-frequency words are often the first words we strive to anchor into our students' sight word memory. That's because high-frequency words are words that occur most often in print. At Really Great Reading, we call these words heart words. Heart words are the first words students should learn by heart. These words become sight words for our students because they appear in text so frequently, and automatically treating these words plays a big part in reading fluently. Commonly, educators try to teach high-frequency words through rote memorization. They use flashcards or put them on a word wall, hoping that if students see the words enough times, they will stick.
This isn't much different than what we do in geography when we ask students to look at the shape of a state and then name it. The state with this shape is California. This shape is Florida. Decades
Words. It's how to make the trick stick.
Really Great Reading is developing a free tool that will help children build and train heart words into their sight word memories. It's called Heart Word Magic.
Heart word magic will leverage students' phonemic awareness and phonics knowledge to make learning high-frequency words fun and effective. To see an example using the word said, click here.
hearing sound.
I think that I can hear you a lot.
Do you hear sound, or are they hearing sound?
I think it probably will, because I can hear.
And also, can you let Pam in? I think there's someone stuck. We just, if it's not working, we can talk about it, I guess. Do you have a wand?
All right.
Are they hearing?
Yeah.
No, we hear you, but we don't hear you.
All right. We can hear you on copy, but don't hear you down for the computer program.
Stop sharing your screen.
Click share your screen again.
Okay, click the button at the bottom left that says share computer sound. Then share your screen.
Thank you.
If you don't have that shared, then they can't share it.
Guys, I'm really sorry. I apologize. We're doing it a little differently today. Yeah. There we go.
Let's examine the word said, as in, Mom said to take off your shoes.
Said rhymes with words you know, like said and did. Let's see if we can figure out which parts of said we know and which parts we have to learn by heart.
Said has three sounds, s and d. The first sound, s, is spelled with the letter S. The last sound, d, is spelled with the letter D. We can read these parts using our phonics knowledge.
The middle sound, eh, short E, is spelled with the letters AI. This is the one part we have to know by heart.
We might see the word said in different shapes, colors, and sizes. Said, 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 said. These all have the same letters, and they all say said.
Now let's see if you can remember how to spell the word said. Said. We can use our phonics knowledge to spell the first and the last sounds. The first sound is S. How do we spell S? Yes, the letter S. The last sound is D. How do we spell D? The letter D.
The middle sound, is the part we have to learn by heart. Do you remember how to spell in this word? You're right. We use the letters AI. S-A-I-D, said. Remembering heart words is easier when we know there is just one part to learn by heart.
All right, so we apologize for the technical difficulties. We're all learning every single day how to manage that technology. I'm learning a lot. So if you weren't able to hear all of the video, the premise of it is that you start off with the sounds that students know, like the s in said and the d in said, and then you intentionally and explicitly teach that in the word said, the heart part, the part you have to remember, is that AI represents the sound eh. On Really Great Reading, the website that's linked here, they have lots of words and videos for those words, common irregularly spelled words that kids are going to have to learn that heart part so that they can automatically recognize them and read them effortlessly. Also on the slideshow, if we go back to our slideshow, you can see that we have those linked here, and you can go back and see those. At the bottom, this is also from the University of Florida. These are slides of various heart words that you can project. They have the different parts. They have the hearts for the part that you have to remember. And then there are some presenter notes that can be helpful to teachers as they're teaching these words. Okay, so all of that brings us back to the simple view. We've talked about the word recognition piece and how important that is. In order for students to have the cognitive ability freed up for comprehension and to have that automatic recognition to build fluency, we need to take care of the word recognition piece. I know that's a lot of information, but once you know how all of that works together, that can really help you understand what particular intervention is best to provide for certain students when you see where they are struggling or where their difficulty lies. And when that's firm, then language comprehension can be your focus of instruction. Now, with that being said, if you're focusing on word recognition instruction for students, you want to continue to support language comprehension with things that you are reading aloud, conversations that you are having with your students, things that I know as teachers of English learners you're already doing. So those things are going to continue to support your students. This is just a way that maybe you haven't been supporting them with the word recognition piece. All right, so we're going to take a little break in between. I know that was a lot of information and a long time to sit and to listen. Okay, all right, so we're going to take a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back and Jody will speak with you about language comprehension.
All right, if you could go ahead and join us back, we'll go ahead and get started again. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Jody Randolph. I'm at Riverbend Elementary. This year I'm actually teaching 5th grade, but the last 2 years I have been a reading specialist at Riverbend. So I'm actually going to continue talking with you about that reading rope, but we're going to look at a different level of it. Okay, so Stephanie talked about that word recognition part, this part right over here, and I'm going to focus on this language comprehension part. This is an area that's probably very valuable for all teachers, but it's also very valuable for English language learners in learning the language and being able to create that reading comprehension, which is going to be our end goal. So here's where we are. So you'll notice down here, there's a couple strands, but even though this looks like the word recognition down there looks like it's really small, it's actually a huge area. And so is the language comprehension. So there's a lot of different parts within each strands of these ropes. And I think it's just really important to note that if one of these strands is broken, reading comprehension is going to be affected. And we want to make sure that we are focusing on those areas that our kiddos need, or where the need is and where the weakness is, so that we can build that strand up so that they will be able to make all of these connections to make reading happen. And it's going to happen differently with each kid. So each kid, one kid may breeze through the word recognition part and another kid may not. So we do have to adapt our instruction. I think that's just really important to note. So I'm going to be focusing on background knowledge, vocabulary, language structure, verbal reasoning, and overall literacy knowledge. So we're going to start with print concepts, or this area is within our literacy knowledge. And this area is taught typically early in a child's literacy instruction. This is the area that sometimes gets overlooked because we assume that most of our kids are going to come to us with some sort of print knowledge. However, we know that just doesn't happen with some of our kids. They just don't have those experiences, so we have to fill that in. And when we talk about print awareness, we're talking about the influences that it has on language development, the phonological awareness piece, so it's relating back to that word recognition, but then ultimately over to their reading and writing development. And you'll notice here we have a sign of McDonald's, environmental print, right? Okay, my son, who's over here in this picture, he's actually reading a map. He's 4. We were at the Frontier Culture Museum, and he was kind of leading us around by reading that map. Now, was he truly reading? No, but that's okay. It's those early experiences that matter. And those kiddos that come to us, a lot of our kids just don't have those experiences, so we have to give those to them. So I know it sounds very basic, but it's not. And then with the M for McDonald's, I always put that one in there because that's a very common one for kids. That's usually they have some sort of connection or some sort of association with a letter or with something in their name based on something in their own environment. So here, literacy knowledge, again, it starts really early. These are my kids too. So they, it's simple. It sounds so simple, but some kids just don't have these experiences. So we want to make sure that we do give them those experiences as well. So when we talk about print concepts, it's huge. There's a lot of things that go into that. So we're going to talk about recognizing as simple as shapes and letters, and being able to distinguish the differences between letters, shapes, and words. Knowing that print, not the picture, tells the story. You've probably experienced a little kindergartner maybe that has come to your pre-K kid
that they didn't have that true understanding of that yet. And so we have to help them get there and give them those experiences. Connecting oral language to written language is also important. Holding a book right side up. Okay, we've all had those kids who come and they hold that book upside down. And what do you say? What are you doing? I'm reading. Great. And so we kind of go in and we intervene with them in that. So a lot of this is taught through their experiences in their home life. But when they don't have that, we do reinforce that in their schooling. Okay. Any questions about that one before I move on? And here's some more concepts that go into that. And this is from the University of Florida. It's the same site. They have a lot of resources on that site, so it is a good site to visit if you want some additional resources and to give you some additional knowledge as well. Knowing when to stop reading on a page and where to go next, reading from the front to the back of the book, all of these things, punctuation, capital letters, all of this is going to go into that. So we do have to spend some time sometimes with some of our kids coming in to really work on this, because this does ultimately affect their reading. So here's an example. I tried to bring in some content here because I know we work with a lot of kids, especially in the upper elementary level, with content area and building up that. So, and making connections with them. So here's a picture. And if we're going to use verbal reasoning for this, we want to make inferences, right? So look at this picture. What do you think is happening? What does this picture represent? What do you notice? And you all can use, those of you who are on your computers, you can use the chat box to participate, or you all can just say. Some of you may recognize this picture if you've taught fourth grade. Well, you should notice, if you look at this picture and you look at the background, you may notice that some kids, and when I do this with my fourth graders, when I taught fourth grade, a lot of my fourth graders were actually able to pick up that this is Jamestown because of the background. And you can see the houses and part of the fort back there. And then it looks like here, there's a settler, but you know, this represents the starving time. So then bringing in some of that content vocabulary, you can also do that in this verbal reasoning layer, because that's going to also reinforce that layer as well when we get to that. So using pictures sometimes can help bring in those meaningful discussions and bring in that inference layer instead of putting it on text on a page. Because sometimes putting it just in words, I could put this in words very easily, but sometimes kids struggle with that part of it. So if we can make it easier for them and adapt it to where their need is, then we're going to be able to reach that learner in a more effective way. Here's another one. Poetry is really good to use for this, even just short phrases. Obviously, Robert Frost, The Road Not Taken. So this is a higher level. This requires a really high level of comprehension here and verbal reasoning, because it's a metaphor. We're not really talking about a road. And so when readers, I guess when our upper grade level readers read this, a lot of times they tend to stick to that literal meaning of things, and we have to help them get to that inferential level. So we do need to dig a little deeper in that. So poetry is a good way to kind of access that. It's shorter at times for our kids, but it does bring in a lot of these inferencing skills that they will need to be able to understand, to get through those, and to be able to have reading comprehension taking place. All right, if you all use the chat box to kind of say if the sound's not working, we'll try this.
Now, I am very disappointed that I won't be able to celebrate Howard's accomplishment tonight.
Me too, but we'll see him tomorrow.
Yes, it's just that in all the years I've known him, he's never had the opportunity to receive my admiration. I was excited to see the look on his face when it finally happened.
You're unbelievable.
I know.
All right, Pictionary. What are the teams?
How about boys versus girls?
Oh, that hardly seems fair. Yeah, but I guess any team that I'm not on has a decided disadvantage.
Once again, unbelievable.
Once again, I know.
All right, round one. Here.
Got it.
Okay, ready, set, go. Box. Window.
Batman. Batman and Robin. Wonder Twins plus the monkey. Wonder twins plus the monkey and Batman.
Gift, present.
Yeah!
Oh, Leonard. Now, how can you not get that?
In what universe is that a present?
It's not a present, it's the present. Look, there's you and me, there's Penny and Amy. We're playing Pictionary in the present.
Oh my god, we're gonna kill them.
It's a quark gluon plasma.
No.
It's asymptotically free partons inside a quark gluon plasma.
Nothing with quarks.
It's an observational rebuttal of the lambda CDM model of the universe.
No.
It's a chocolate chip cookie, yes!
How could you miss that?
Hey, if you want someone to guess chocolate chip cookie, you draw a glass of milk next to it.
Penny got it.
Yeah, only after I eliminated all the obvious answers. You're welcome.
Sausage. Bratwurst. Hot dog.
Penny, aren't you gonna draw something? Relax, we got time. This is so fun.
There.
A solar system. Unidentified flying liverwurst.
Now? Soon.
Come on, Leonard. I am spoon feeding this to you.
I don't know. Casper the alcoholic ghost.
All right, that's enough. Hand, nail, polish?
No! Hey, the word is Polish. See, look. Polish sausage. The model of the solar system developed by Nicholas Copernicus, a Polish astronomer. And finally, that wasn't enough, which it should have been. This is Madame Curie killing herself by discovering radium, who, although she was a naturalized French citizen, was Polish by birth.
Excuse me, the word is polish. See? Small p.
Oh. So it is. I guess we both share blame on this one.
1, 2, 3, pick.
Okay, so that video, oh, I'm still on mute, am I? No. That video kind of just illustrates sometimes when we think about vocabulary, we talk about this higher level of the language comprehension, just some simple assumptions that sometimes we make that we need to really think about how are our students understanding this. I mean, as simple as the word polish and Polish, and they can easily make those mistakes. And so we have to explicitly teach those to them. And when we talk about language structure, that's what we're really talking about there, is teaching in the difference and how that changes the meaning as well to incorporate into their reading comprehension. So I'm going to share my screen again. And I can't take credit for that video. I actually was doing a professional development over the weekend, some of my own professional development with JMU, and the professor actually shared this in a whole different aspect, but I was like, this is perfect. This is what I'm talking about. So I added that in. I thought that was kind of funny to share. So language structures, again, are that relationship between the words and the sentences. And so when we talk about syntax, that's one of the areas within that language structure that we do need to make sure that we are focusing on, and that is how sentences work. Syntax is basically the rule system within our language that governs how speakers can combine the words to make coherent, meaningful sentences. And when we talk about that, we can teach through sentence structure, teaching them that, and how phrases and clauses are assembled, and then the roles words will play within those sentence structures. So it's important that this is one of the parts that's probably going to need to be more explicitly taught to our kids, and we're really going to have to focus on helping them create that meaning. And this also can be done orally and through written text. So this can be done on both sides. The other area that goes in with language structures is semantics. And that's going to be the meaning layer. So the words and the sentences as it relates to meaning. And so words and concepts are known in relationship to one another. We don't usually say that we don't associate them with isolated units, because really when we put this together, when we put a sentence together, we're putting those words together our ultimate goal is to create meaning. And we're doing that through connections. So you can do this when we talk about words, sentences, and context. There's three different layers to this. There's the lexical semantics, which is at the word level, okay? And then there's the sentential semantics, which is at the sentence level, and then pragmatics in that social context. And a lot of you all probably do that through your oral language, so when you work with English language learners, but a lot of that can be taught there as well. And it is important to note that when we think about language is different when we speak orally than when it is written on a page. We're able to have some of our body language and things like that in there to interpret that. When we're looking at writing, we really have to use what's on that page, and we have to kind of use some of that inferential level as well. So ways you can support this, and I will link this in there in the resource folder that we will share with you. There will be some examples of some graphic organizers and things like that you can use that can be used for content area or just more specific vocabulary that you're teaching them. And that can be, I guess you could apply it to multiple different settings. One area you can kind of support this is rate your knowledge of the word. And this is kind of something for you as the teacher to look at and say, okay, what do they know? And so you can give them a list of words. You could even give it in a sentence. It just depends how you want to present it to your student. But giving them this and letting them know, like, I've heard the word before, but I don't know what it means. I've heard the word before, and I do know what it means. There's different layers you can add to that. You can even give it a score if you want, as long as your kids know what those scores are. If you give it a 4, 3, 2, or 1, or 3, 2, or 1 rating. But it's important to note the level of understanding that they have of those words within those sentences for this level. So you can do simple charts like that, and I'll have an example of one in there for you so you can look at that and just to see where they are, because that's kind of a general consensus for you to know, okay, so they know this word, but they don't know some of these other words that are related to this word, so I need to explicitly teach them some of those meaning levels of that. Semantic field maps, it's very similar to the Freyer model. When you're looking at here's a word, and you're looking at examples, non-examples, synonyms, things like that of that word. So you can kind of use these mapping tools to help them associate meaning on that semantic level. Categorizing is something that I have used a lot with my 4th and 5th graders that I've worked with in the past, even 3rd graders. Even as a specialist, I did a lot of this. Because one thing that teachers that I worked with in the upper elementary levels was that they really wanted me to support vocabulary in the content areas with those students. And that was a need for them to create that overall reading comprehension. So I would focus on that. And so I would do some of these things when I had them with me in the small group time, or if I was pushing in. Sometimes teachers use these, and you can support teachers when you're pushing in with these different things. So for categorizing, I like to let the students kind of take charge of this one and to kind of see what their thinking is, because we don't all think alike. And sometimes they can make some really interesting connections among words to help them remember the meaning and associations with those words that you and I may not make. So letting them have a little bit of control in this area, I think, is important. But you would give them a group of words, maybe related to a content area. If you are studying oceans in 5th grade science, you may give them vocabulary words or some just words that could be related within that unit. Or if you're reading a story or a certain book and you have words that are related within that text, and then you can help them categorize, because we know that we we remember words by meaning. And so when we're looking and when we're thinking about comprehension, and so being able to make as many connections to different words as they can is going to be important, because then they're going to have a deeper level of understanding of the words that they are reading, or the words that they are faced with, or the words that they hear. Another way to do this, with the categorizing, basically they can sort them into categories. And as long as they can explain why they sorted those into those categories, this strategy would work. But again, they have to have a little bit of knowledge of those words to be able to do this. So giving them a list of words that they don't know the meaning of is going to be pretty pointless, because then again, this strategy, which is a good strategy, isn't really a strategy for them, because they can't actually complete the task that you want them to do. So I think that's important to note. Semantic feature analysis. A lot of times we do this in content areas, and I'll have an example of this. And I don't have an example of this, and you're kind of breaking this apart and saying, you're looking at different words. It could be also different sentences and things like that. But the kids they're kind of breaking them apart and making connections to this. And I will bring up an example of it. I don't know if I have. Okay, if that's not in that folder, I'll make sure. I was uploading some things last night, and my internet at home was acting up, so I wasn't able to add all of those things in there. So I think, going back and looking at that resource folder, that will help you kind of be able to use some of these tools. Some other ways that you can support semantics is through teaching synonyms and antonyms. You've probably seen the grades with the shades of meaning. That's, again, looking at that meaning layer and saying, how deeply do they know these things? Again, making connections between other words. That making connections part is going to be really important. Formal definitions, that's important just to kind of have something to hold on to of what that really means. Multiple meanings. You can also use some graphic organizers to help kids with this. You can actually use pictures for your youngest students. When you're talking about multiple meanings, you can give them maybe it's green. If you're talking about the word green, well, then they can associate different things that they know with green to help them understand the word green. Figurative language with the idioms, the similes, and the metaphors. Again, I think I already said this, but this is probably an area that you all do work with your English language learners on, because that is sometimes a difficult layer for them. Figures of speech, and again, connecting phrases into clauses and substituting. Like if I take this clause out and I change it to this, how does that change that meaning? Being able to be flexible with that, and again, pulling in different meanings and connections that they may have. Pragmatics, making sense in context. That's also going to be really important. Does anyone have any questions? All right, so our last two levels that we're going to talk about in our language comprehension, this is a really big one for our kiddos, and that's vocabulary. And vocabulary knowledge combined with background knowledge is a strong base for reading comprehension. Vocabulary knowledge is a really big piece of this. I'm also going to talk I'm going to end with background knowledge. And background knowledge, I'll just tell you, is huge when it relates to the area of reading comprehension. And vocabulary is also individualized. We have to understand that each student's, just like their sight word vocabulary. When I talk about vocabulary here, I'm talking about more of the meaning of those words. So how many words does a student know in their vocabulary, but also what is the depth of their understanding? Because I can know a word, but if I don't have that deep level of understanding of that word, and ultimately the third one there, how can they apply it to new words and situations? If I can't do that, my level of understanding is probably pretty shallow. So we want to make sure that that when we teach vocabulary, we're not just teaching kids to use vocabulary at that surface level. We want them to be able to have a greater depth of their understanding, but we really want them to be able to apply that word to new situations and make those connections. Again, there's that word connections. And you'll notice through this whole strand, a lot of it is making connections with what they know. Okay. When we talk about vocabulary, sometimes and you may have seen this, where you can take the vocabulary words that you know, or you're trying to decide which ones to teach, because we know there are not enough hours in the day to teach every vocabulary word to every child. It just can't happen. So how do we know what to teach? And again, sometimes this may be a little bit more individualized based on the individual kid, or it may be in your unit and you're looking at it from like the whole, what you want them to know at the end. What do you want them to come out with knowing? And then so to be able to do that, what vocabulary do I need to explicitly teach? And you're going to break those vocabulary words into 3 tiers. So your tier 1, which is at the bottom, and you'll notice that's the biggest layer or the biggest level. And those words are words that are used in everyday speech. And those are going to be the words that are going to be familiar to most students. Now notice it says most students. Again, think of the individual. Some students that I know when I worked as a reading specialist, and I know when you all work with them as an English language teacher, you may have to do more instruction in that area than a regular typical classroom teacher may be doing. So you actually may have to go back and focus in that area too. I'm not saying that tier 1 words aren't taught, because they do need to be taught to some students. But when we categorize our words and what we're wanting them to know, those tier 1 words are your everyday speech words, and they're familiar to most kids. Tier 2 are your high frequency words, and they are going to be found in different subjects and discipline, and there's some examples there, and those are going to be across contents. So like examine, authority, establish, those are maybe a little less common words, but kids do see them quite often, maybe more so in like academic language as well. So some of that kind of does overlap with the tier 3. But your tier 3 words are your specific subject or subject-specific vocabulary words. For example, photosynthesis. So those are the words that you're probably going to spend the most time on explicitly teaching. You're not going to not ignore those tier 2 and tier 3 words, but those tier 3 words you're going to probably explicitly teach, and you're going to spend more time on. So kind of breaking them into those 3 tiers. I know when I'm planning my instruction, whether it's as a reading specialist or in the classroom, working with other teachers and students across different grade levels, I do a lot of this. And this kind of helps me map out where I need to focus my instruction with those kids. So here is an example of this. So here are some words that I took out of I actually just took, it was an article that was in one of it was not an article, maybe it was, I'm trying to think, what was it? Something in the 4th grade social studies folder. I just kind of looked at something we had in the county, and here were some words that were used. And so when we look at these words, you may have a group of words like this. If you're reading, maybe you're reading a passage or you're reading a text with students. And so this kind of relates to content areas, but it also clearly to literacy. Where and how do we teach these words? So some of these words are going to fall into most of these words are going to fall into maybe your tier 2 and tier 3 words. A couple may fall into tier 1, but there are going to be some on this that you may have to really explicitly teach. Are there any that stand out that you would probably explicitly teach? Brackish, yep. Usually kids remember that, but it's probably a word that as a 4th grade teacher and as other support teachers along the way, we do spend time on that kind of word. So I know we already do this, but it is important to note that, that sometimes a tier 3 word for some kids may be a little different, but in theory, we can get those into 3 tiers. Any other words that you may have to explicitly teach? Economic venture. And so sometimes what I find is like kids say, oh, I know these words, but they say they know them because they can read them. But being able to read a word and actually knowing what it means and being able to apply is 2 different things. So making sure, yes, we want kids to be able to read these words, and that's where that word recognition part comes into that. But we definitely want them to be able to understand these words as well with that meaning layer. So, being able to read a word doesn't, and for me, sometimes I know I overlook this sometimes, especially when I'm a classroom teacher. And there are times I need to really go back and spend some time with some kids on that meaning level or meaning layer. So implications for instruction with this are when we're teaching vocabulary, we definitely want to be intentional because we cannot teach every vocabulary word. We want direct, explicit instruction of vocabulary, especially those tier 3 words. So some things you can do with students, you can do dictionary meanings. And I don't mean literally giving a kid a dictionary and saying, go look up that word and figure out the meaning, because we know that that's probably not a best practice. And that's also not really going to teach that kid that meaning of that word. We're going to have to do some instruction with that. But what we mean by that dictionary meaning is just kind of knowing just in general, what that word means. I don't literally mean a dictionary and go have them search for words. So in their mind, how do they categorize and catalog their vocabulary? So just knowing that basic layer of definition is important too. Language and common reference. So when kids can make these connections between different words, that can make connections between different meanings or ways that the word is used, the more they can do that, the better off they're going to be. So giving them multiple uses of the word and exposing them to that in language and in context is also going to help them make those connections to be able to deeply understand that. Morphemic analysis, I'm going to go over that a little bit, but that's that meaning layer. Cognate awareness, this is extremely important to EL students, and we know you spend a lot of time in this because some languages overlap a little bit more commonly with English and some do not. Spanish, am I right, is probably the more common, okay? And there are some that are very true, that help with the meaning, but then there are some words that are like that false cognate that do not. So, just being able to explain that to kids is important. And then also being able, in that contextual analysis, being able to use it within a text and context. So, morphemic analysis and English language learners, what we know. So, morphological knowledge, especially of derivational morphology, plays an increasing role in vocabulary development from 4th grade on. And this is probably something you've probably been aware of, that meaning layer does, especially starting around 4th grade. Because typically until then, kids are still learning. We're increasing their vocabularies through oral language and experiences and through their reading. But a lot of that content area base is going to come more into that 4th grade and above. And a lot of times before that, we're also teaching more specifically in that word recognition part of this with vocabulary. So English language learners especially benefit from explicit instruction in meaningful word parts. Being able to infer meaning of new words is going to be important. Word formation in English is not necessarily the same in other languages, and we know that. English language students most likely need extra instruction with distinguishing and pronouncing similar sounding words. So that's also an area that we may want to look at as well. So when we do a morphemic analysis, we're looking at words and we want them, especially this picture over here to the right with the root word or the base word of help, and putting that prefix onto the beginning of that word. How does that change that word meaning? And helping students understand that adding prefixes and suffixes and derivations to those words are going to change the meaning of those root words and helping them kind of break that down. So if you have a word over here, you can break it down for the read, and then able. So you can look at those, how that word is broken down. And a lot of times if you are working with students in word study, especially in the derivation stage, that DR word study level, this is really important because this is what this focuses on. But it also, in that syllable level, this also goes into that as well. But we can start this early before they're actually ready to start writing and spelling these, because we're working on their oral language comprehension with these words. So you can change the meanings, and you can see there, this is kind of a good graphic. I like this graphic to kind of show that, there are multiple things we can do to one word, and it's going to change that whole meaning of that word or the way that it's used. Extensive, so here's just reading, but how does vocabulary particularly tie into reading comprehension? Extensive and rich vocabulary knowledge helps readers make sense of what they are reading, and that's our goal. It's very similar to background knowledge, which I'm going to touch on in just a minute. So a lot of things that I'm going to be saying with background knowledge, you're also going to be relate that to vocabulary instruction. Vocabulary knowledge is a prominent predictor of reading comprehension, and it is depicted as a central thread to the language comprehension component of the simple view of reading. And it is because it does connect a couple of these things. So vocabulary is going to connect what I'm going to talk about with background knowledge and that language structure. So it kind of is that connection between. All right, so the last strand, background knowledge, and background knowledge is huge. And so when we talk about background knowledge, I know it's something as educators we hear all the time. Background knowledge is important. But sometimes, and I know I am so guilty of this too, is that I don't know that I sometimes spend enough time on background knowledge for my kids. And I really need to, and I've really tried to be more intentional on this as looking at what do my kids already know. So knowledge versus background knowledge, there is, you know, what they know, but then the background knowledge, when we say background knowledge, we're specifically talking about their knowledge of a certain topic or area that they can pull in to be able to apply it to a new situation, okay? So just knowing something is sometimes just not enough, okay? So we know that knowledge leads to more knowledge, making learning easier. And that came from Willingham. So yes, knowledge is power. So just to kind of illustrate with you, I know this is super researchy, and for those of you who know me, I love research, but not everybody does. But I love research. So this study to me is very fascinating because this truly illustrates the importance of background knowledge. And so it was the baseball study, and this was done in 1988. So background knowledge is not a new thing. We've heard about it for years. But what they basically did in this study was they weren't actually looking at reading ability. Okay, they were actually looking at memory is what they were testing here, but what they found was fascinating. So they took 7th and 8th graders from a variety of different backgrounds, and there was a passage that went to this. It was adapted to about a 5th grade reading level, and they changed names and to teams and players that of like actual baseball teams with Major League Baseball that the kids would actually be able to make connections to. And there was this pre-test to see how much the kids already knew before looking at this passage on baseball. And it was actually I think that it was an inning of baseball that they had retold. And so they had this pretest. So then they split the kids into 4 different groups based on that pretest, which I'll show you on the next slide. They read the passage, but they could also ask for words they didn't know because, again, they weren't testing reading. They were looking more at memory, but they found some significant background knowledge information. So they had to retell the half of inning of baseball, and they were given an actual baseball field with figures they could manipulate to help them actually retell this inning. And again, they used common, I think they used Brewers maybe, I'm not sure. They used real baseball teams with real names that kids could make connections to as well. I think that's important to note. So they had them into 4 categories based on their background knowledge and based on what they knew of the kids. So the first group was your high reading ability kids that also had high background knowledge of baseball. The second group was also another group of kids that had high reading ability, but they didn't have a lot of background knowledge of baseball, okay? Then on the bottom, the bottom 2 groups, there was the kids that had low reading ability, but they had a really high background knowledge of baseball. And then the last group was your kids that had a low reading ability, but they had a low knowledge of baseball. Any predictions on how what their outcomes were? Anyone want to make a prediction?
About their ability to retell?
Yes, good question. About their ability to retell. Who do you think who did the best with this? Or scored higher, I guess? The yellow group, okay. Because you're high readers and the high background knowledge, okay.
I think
What about the other team? How do you think they did?
It's probably anybody that has knowledge of baseball probably did better than people who didn't have knowledge of baseball.
Okay. Okay, and she said, for those of you she said those who had the background knowledge of baseball, even with a low reading ability, probably did okay because of their knowledge of baseball. Any other thoughts? Are there any in the chat? I thought I saw one come up.
Green group. Sorry.
Green group, okay. Yeah. So it's interesting. So here are the results, and they're color-coded to that. And you'll find that
the effect of background knowledge on good readers and poor readers, that's what they actually ended up finding, is that even those kids that did have that low reading ability, because of their background knowledge, they were able and they were more successful than those kids who were better readers than them, but they had that background knowledge to make that connection with the meaning layer, with being able to retell that ending of that. So that background knowledge, this study shows it perfectly how important background knowledge is. And it is really important to take time with our kids. If we are expecting them, if our end goal is for them to read a really challenging text, it doesn't really matter the reading ability of that kiddo, because if they don't have that background knowledge, your overall at the ending result is not going to be as high as what you probably want it to be. Okay, so this is huge, and you can see there's your high readers up here in the blue, but there's kind of where they fared with that lack of background knowledge. So I think this study to me is just fascinating, but it illustrates a really important point about background knowledge. So background knowledge, strong background knowledge does help readers, but what it helps them do is when they have that background knowledge, they're able to arrange those sequence of events because they're able to connect it to meaning. And they're able to do that at a higher level, regardless of their reading ability, because they have that connection, that background knowledge. But it also makes analyzing the text easier when they can break that down, or they can actually apply it to different situations and bring in other things. So when they're trying to do that higher level skill of analyzing, that background knowledge is going to play a huge key role in that area. It's also going to be easier for them to remember things, which seems kind of simple, but because they have something to connect it to. They can relate it. They can make those connections. That's based on their background knowledge. And that was Willingham. That was his research on that. So background knowledge is critical, especially for not only your struggling readers, because we know that our struggling readers often lack that background knowledge, but they also lack that reading ability. So there's two areas we really have to help them with and support them with if we want them to read something that's going to be a little more challenging to them. But also our English language learners, because they may not have the same experiences, especially depending on their background. So we have to consider a kid's background when we look at background knowledge too, as what is their life experiences. And again, this is not going to be, I wish I could say, here's the diet for teaching background knowledge, but that's just not really going to work because every kiddo is going to be different. So for our instructional purposes, so how does that affect our instruction? Well, and I am totally guilty of this. So when we look at activating background knowledge versus building background knowledge, there is a little bit of a difference there. When we're activating background knowledge, we're asking students to think about what they already know. That's their prior knowledge. So we're just kind of bringing that to their attention. We're helping them make those connections because sometimes kids know things and they do have background knowledge, but they may not be able to make those connections. So as educators, we help them do that. So we have strategies and things that we can use to help them to activate their background knowledge. Building is a little different because building is helping students gain or increase that knowledge. And this is more for unfamiliar topics. So those kids in that baseball study, they really needed to focus on, the teacher really needed to focus on building that background knowledge, even for those high readers. And sometimes I think we overlook some of our higher readers because we're like, oh, they can just read it, they'll get it. Not always the case. And we know that. So that's something really to consider there. But we really need to focus on the difference between that. And sometimes I'm totally guilty of this too, is as an educator, I'm really good at sometimes activating their background knowledge, but I don't spend enough time building that background knowledge that they're really going to need to be able to conquer that task of what I really want them to do at the end. So strategies. I know I've talked about strategies and I've said that word strategies, yes or no. So this is my little soapbox on strategies. Strategies are great and can be helpful, but they're not always helpful unless they have the adequate background knowledge. It's just like those vocabulary maps and things that I was talking about. Asking a kid to do a vocabulary map with that in the meaning piece, if they don't have that background knowledge or they don't have the ability to make those connections and that knowledge, it's somewhat pointless for them to have to do those tasks. So strategies are wonderful and they can be very helpful, but I think we just need to make sure that what we're giving them and just kind of reminding ourselves, is this actually going to help the child do what I want them to do? And if they don't have that background knowledge, that strategy may be not as useful for that student as we think it could be, or as we want it to be. And so I'm going to give you some examples of that. So a really popular way to activate background knowledge is a KWL chart, okay? And I use these all the time. And sometimes when and I know you've probably seen this too, when you give these to kids, I actually had my kiddos do this the other day I was asking them a question, we were learning about the rock cycle of can you make lava? And so they actually did pretty good on this, but I spent a lot of time building that background knowledge so that they were able to actually pull in some of that background knowledge.